Howdy and welcome to another episode of Baking with the Beard. Is that what we decided to call it? I think so. Day 4, episode 4 of making your own sourdough. Hopefully you've been following the last few sessions, you've been feeding your starter by discarding half, replacing it with fresh flour and fresh water, get all those enzymes working, and now you've got a slightly bubbly or very bubbly looking little starter, like Juno here. If you're at a stage where it's looking nice and bubbly, like my one is, then we can move on to the next step. We can start preparing this to bake. If you're not quite at that step yet, then don't fret about it. We're going to just repeat exactly what you did yesterday, and I'll go through both options quickly with you. Okay, so your first task today is to decide if you are going to be preparing to bake or if you're going to be just doing another feed, getting ready to bake in a few days' time. What are the advantages of either direction? If you've got a nice bubbly starter, you might as well prepare to bake. If you've got a bit of activity in there, you can see some surface bubbles or some bubbles around the side, you might as well, there's no harm doing it. To go down that route, we need some of that bread flour we spoke about. So if you either don't have any of that bread flour yet, or you don't have the bubbles forming yet, move to the idea of just doing another feed. There's nothing wrong with just keep on feeding it every day to get him nice and active. As we said before, he will only get better, or she, will only get better over time. And there's no rush to start baking. You can do it whenever you feel ready. So, if you're going to go into this camp, we're just going to do exactly the same as what we did yesterday. We're going to discard half, we're going to replace it with another 50 grams of flour, another 50 grams of water. If, however, you're going to join us in the getting ready to bake camp, what we're going to do is today we're going to feed him twice. That way we get him super active, and we will always do this before a baking day. We will feed him twice. Usual implements. Regardless of which option you're choosing for today, whether you're getting ready to bake or you're just feeding as normal, we're going to go through the first step together. We're going to discard half of what's in there and replace it with fresh, active yeast and water. Flour and water. Right, so, same as yesterday. Worth of my starter and discard it. There we go, let's give that a nice pour there. 57, 80. When you discard half, have a look at what's being discarded. If that's got lots of air bubbles and pockets in there and there's lots of air bubbles left over, that's a pretty good sign things are nice and active. Like I said, there's no pressure at this stage. If you're not at that bubbly stage yet, just keep on refeeding like we did before, and we'll get to the baking when it's ready. A key theme in yesterday's video was timing. There's no point rushing this, we might as well get it right. Got all the time in the world on lockdown. Now yesterday we fed with some wholemeal and some white. Today, if you're just doing one feed and setting it aside, I would say just do white. If you're going to do feeding to get ready to bake, I would do one feed with just white and the second feed with half and half. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to start with a just white feed right now. Which should be the same for both groups of people. One little tip is, if you've got a jar which has got funny shaped corners and edges, make sure you're not leaving any starter in those edges, because that's where it kind of goes a bit, that's where it can kind of all congregate together and go a bit stodgy, and then it becomes quite dry, and those are the bits that eventually turn to a little bit of mould and you end up having to change into a different jar. So if you've got a shaped jar, just watch out. It's quite a messy process moving it all in and out all the time. Right, she's zeroed, and I'm looking for 50 grams of white flour. 20, 50. 50 grams of fresh water. I've actually just poured in, by accident, not concentrating, a little bit too much. But that's not a problem. We just offset by adding a little bit more flour in. I poured in an extra 10 grams more than I intended, so I'll add in an equal measure of that of flour, just to correct my slight lack of concentration. There we go. Now, as per usual, I'm just going to mix this all in. Just had a short intermission because the bun, who is mowing the lawn outside, had a small problem I had to go and mechanically deal with. Anyway, now that I'm back, mixing in today's addition of flour and water. Making sure we've got the right consistency we've been looking for the last few days. So, at the moment it's a little bit too thick. Let's get all this mixed in. We want no dry bits. That's our aim, no dry bits. Okay, so that fella's ready, all mixed in. Now, here's the key junction. If you are not yet ready to bake, so if your starter isn't quite bubbly enough yet, or you're not going to have the time to bake tomorrow, or you don't have any bread flour to hand just yet, that's absolutely fine. You fed your starter for the day, stick him back where he lives, and we'll revisit him tomorrow. If, however, you're baking tomorrow, you need to do another feed today. Exactly the same as what we've just done. Okay, so how I usually space it out is I usually give him 2 meals in the course of the day. I usually give him a breakfast and I give him a dinner. If you're watching this a little bit later on in the day, then you could give him a lunch and a dinner. Or alternatively, you know, if it's already too late in the day to start a double feed, then single feed today and do a double feed tomorrow. The key thing here is if you're getting ready to bake, we feed him twice. That gives us a really active, really bubbly starter to work with and gives you the best chance of creating a nice, expanded, well-cooked loaf of bread. So, decide what camp you're in. If you're not yet ready to bake, that's all good. We'll see you tomorrow and we'll keep on feeding. If you're ready to bake, get your second feed done later on today. And we will start tomorrow to prepare him to go into some dough, turn him into some bread. What you'll need to have ready for tomorrow, if you are baking, is a total of 375 grams of flour. Now, ideally, the way that I do it, this would be strong white bread flour and a little bit of wholemeal. I usually use about 50 or 75 grams of wholemeal, depending on how I'm feeling, and 300 grams of strong bread flour. That's all you need. And effectively what we're making here, and what I usually cook, are what I call 3/4 loaves. The reason they are 3/4 loaves, most recipes denote that you cook 500 grams of flour at a time. That makes quite a large loaf, and I think the best way to cook as a beginner is to cook inside of a sealed casserole dish, as I explained previously. If you're cooking inside of a sealed casserole dish, 500 grams is usually far too much for most casserole dishes you're already going to have around the house. It's fine if you buy a purpose-built baking casserole dish, a proper Dutch oven, but other than that, 500 grams is usually a bit too big. It's also quite a lot of dough to work with for your first loaves. It's also quite a lot of dough to eat, and you don't want anything to go to waste as much as you can help it. So I highly recommend starting with what I call 3/4 loaves. The beauty about that is that right now, while everything's on lockdown, we're going to use a little bit less flour per loaf. It means if it doesn't all go quite right, we're wasting a little bit less. And also it means that if you do have a casserole dish at home that you can cook in, chances are it's going to fit quite nicely in there and have a chance to rise. If you went with the full 500 and squeezed it into a casserole dish that isn't quite big enough, When you're popping it in, it's going to get stuck to the sides, it's all going to tear apart, and the whole thing goes out the window. So, the recipe we're going to cook with is going to be a 3/4 loaf of sourdough bread. If you've only got white, you don't have any wholemeal, that's not a problem. We'll just go white. If you've got both, like I said, we need a total of 375 grams ready to cook tomorrow. Other than that, that's it for today. I'm going to go and check to make sure the bun hasn't cut her fingers off with the lawnmower. If you've just done a normal feeding, we'll see you back here tomorrow to assess the situation and see if you're ready to start going on a baking journey. If you're doing your double feeding today, set yourself a reminder for in 10 or 12 hours time. Feed her again, just like we have this time. If you want to do a bit of wholemeal in there as well, go for it, because tomorrow you're making bread. So get excited about that. I'm excited for you. I've been really enjoying seeing everybody's progress so far. I'm loving the names that are coming out, especially ones that are called Beardy. Keep on sending over progress of how you're getting. Send me some photos of how your bubbles are coming on, and I can basically give you advice to kind of say, yeah, you might need another 2 days worth of feeding, or yes, you are ready to bake. So any questions, let me know. Thank you for joining me on the journey. I'll see you for Baking with a Beard. Peace out.